at Noon series that we had going earlier this year. And now the moment to shine is theirs as we get ready to listen to them talk about their research. So I think we have a nice group of people. We have 20 people here, and here comes Professor Rodriguez. Professor Rodriguez, welcome. We're so happy that you're able to join us today. We know that you're on research leave, and we're so thrilled that you're here. So once again, welcome everybody. I'm Tara Goldstein, the VP of New College, and you are here for our first session of the Senior Doctoral Fellowship Speaker Series. I'm going to turn the floor over to my wonderful colleague, Professor Kevin Edmonds, who's the Acting Program Director of Caribbean Studies, to introduce Catia Dignard and to start us off. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tara, and good afternoon to everyone joining us. So my name is Kevin. I'm currently the Acting Director of Caribbean Studies. I just wanted to welcome everyone to Catia's presentation today, Linguistic Representations of Black Characters in Cuban Fiction of the New Millennium. I'm mindful of the time, so I'll be quick, but there's a lot. I was lucky enough to catch up with Catia earlier this week and learn more about the presentation that she's putting together. And there's a ton of information that's going to be coming this way that's incredibly fascinating. And she has a wonderful background that hopefully we can spend some time learning about today. But Catia Dignard's this year's New College Fellow representing Caribbean Studies. She's a doctoral candidate in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. Her dissertation examines the topic of linguistic representations of Black characters in contemporary Cuban fiction and how these reflect evolving notions of nationhood, class, and race relations on the island. The first part of this talk will consist of the process and journey that led to this work in progress. And the second part will touch upon her preliminary findings and the work that lies ahead. So with that, Catia, I would just like to pass it over to you to begin your presentation. Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much to all for being here and offering me this space to share this work in progress. So first of all, it's all about the process, the genealogy of this work in progress called doctoral dissertation. I will not be original in stating that research is not a linear process, nor is it always constrained in academic time. In my case, its prehistory goes to 2009, when I started going to Havana with the perspective of a social scientist and intercultural studies prof, accompanying college-level music students, and whose wish was that they also grasp how Cuba's cultural production was influenced by its very unique socioeconomic and historical context. Collaborating with a famous timba group and witnessing the particular dynamics between the owners of the Casa Particulares that hosted us in a high-scale part of the city and their employees, this specific setting underlined the existence of different types of inequalities and unfinished business with regards to race relations, despite the social successes brought by the revolution. As a foreigner, it also meant that when asking questions about certain sensitive topics, even if steering away from the explicitly political, that I could only touch the surface. For the next 10 years, my perception of Cuba would evolve from idealization to disillusionment, to finally dealing with what is and considering this country as my second home. My participation to this project eventually, that was called Stage Cuba, eventually ended, but nevertheless, the web of contacts established from my previous musical network would enable me to enter the more closed community of Cuban writers. Today, I feel very fortunate for their generosity in helping me to advance poco a poco in this seemingly never-ending discovery process of their world, may it be with talks, facilitating interviews with other writers, researchers, poets, cultural agents, and showering me with narrative and poetry from all over the island. So this is the spark that ignited my interest in my present research topic, intertwined with its human and affective dimension. Slide 2. During these back and forth from Cuba, I ended up completing a BA Honors in Hispanic Studies at Bishop's University. And while commenting to one of my professors who was originally from Cuba, what I have observed during my first travels, he handed me a novel that he just received, Negra by Wendigera, and convinced me that it could probably answer some of my questions. He would also facilitate my meeting with the author at a Ravenna home in January of 2015. And this led to my honors thesis titled Deconstructing the Cuban Revolution from the Perspective of Racial Equality in Negra by Wendigera. And this would become my carte de visite for entering graduate studies at U of T. And so I consider this the stepping stone that also made me realize this is what I want to do when I grow up. Slide 3. During my MA in Hispanic Literatures and Cultures at U of T, I worked on 2 research essays that combine both literary and sociolinguistic analysis of 2 different editions of the same Cuban detective fiction novel, Primero Muerto, by Justo Evasco and Daniel Chavarria, which focused on the role of language in protagonist characterization. My interest in this novel not only stemmed from the particular vernacular that served to stigmatize the main protagonist in its first edition, but also to what extent this literary strategy entered in dialogue with sociolinguistic discourses produced both outside and inside Cuba and have pointed to the perceived impoverishment of Cuban Spanish on the island, a topic that was also racialized and could serve to explain a certain shift in the novel's second edition. So while the first edition included a Black new man protagonist and the Havana slang was ascribed to a white delinquent, in its second edition and with backdrop the special period, the Black hero had disappeared, the white protagonist became accidentally mute, and the Havana slang was now the monopoly of the Black and marginal populations. So this prior analysis helped me work out the first chapter, a thesis chapter I handed in, and permitted to appreciate how there was a transition by which Black marginality came to replace Black exceptionality between the 60s and 70s and the 90s forward. Slide 4, please. So during my research process, I also participated in the Cascacuba conference in Santiago de Cuba, dedicated to Fernando Ortiz's major oeuvre, Contrapunteo del Tabaco y Azúcar. And this event not only led me to enhance my knowledge of his work, which once again informs my present research, but also to learn much more about different type of African-based religions, thanks to the workshop given by the Centro Cultural Africano Fernando Ortiz. So these are both the pictures that I took over there. I also witnessed the fondness of many participants from this part of the island for the French language and culture. They had noticed my accent, which is not trivial in Cuba, nor for my research. And one of them talked very proudly about the Alliance Française and studied in Paris. So of course, this was music to my ears because I'm from Montreal originally. I also went to visit with the patron saint of Cuba, which is the Virgen de la Caridad, Adel Cobre, a symbol of Cubanía that finds her way in various Cuban fiction, may it be science fiction even. In a nutshell, I was able to appreciate the distinctiveness of this region as well as the island's extension and contrast, thanks to a 12-hour bus ride back to Havana. This movement towards and from what is termed Oriente and more generally the Caribbean part of the island also corresponded to a movement away from Havana-centric contemporary fiction. Thanks to my meetings with Generación Cero, the so-called Generación Cero, writer Raúl Flores Iriarte, whom I must credit for my corpus of study for this next episode of my talk on Cuban fiction of the new millennium, and for facilitating my interview with one of its authors, Nelton Perez, in July of 2019. Slide 5, please. So this would lead to, so the idea is that I started sorting things, and these were my main hypotheses. And I felt at a certain point that I needed to confront them. So this confrontation was afforded by 2 research travels to Havana. So this corresponds to slide 6, where I did, slide 6, please, where I did some archival work. I met with prominent Afro-Cuban scholars, Victor Fowler, Zuleika Romay, respectively. It was at the Biblioteca Nacional de José Martí, and then at Casa de las Americas, slide 7, please, where you can also appreciate next to this photograph of La Casa de las Americas, the entrance, photograph I took of all these lovely works that come from all over the island that I titled Mis Comidas Cubanas. So these, I went literally on a book hunting. I received from a lot of gifts from writers that wanted me to read their stuff. And because they knew also I was interested by the topic that I'm discussing today, they steered me also to the literature that would be more pertinent for my research. So that was also afforded by Raul Flores, who helped me a lot to, so he gave me some books, and he even told me where to go buy the books. He went with me to go get some books. Then I found other places. And so this was, I brought back a lot of material, not knowing that we would be in a pandemic afterwards, and that well, luckily I had all this material. So it also gave me occasion to conduct interviews with Nelton Perez, and in December of 2019, slide number 8, please, with Pedro Juan Gutierrez, where I discussed with him El Rey de La Habana. So my 2 main objectives were to verify my hypothesis, to know like if I was in the right track, that less prestigious linguistic traits associated with Caribbean Spanish had been brought into and significantly emphasized in Cuban fiction of the 1990s, to see was it just before, or anyways, just to locate it temporally. And also I wanted to know the author's take on the significance of this literary strategy. To summarize this part of my presentation, ends with the last lines of the talk abstract that promoted the event, which states, apart from conveying authenticity, the details of the event is slang when building fictional characters, such a literary device, I contend, was also ways to emphasize the island's socioeconomic and cultural decadence or involution during this decade of economic upheaval. So this was like a conclusion to the first chapter that I handed in. So now, since the 2nd decade of the new millennium, other voices, namely from the Caribbean side of the island, have emerged and imposed themselves in fiction, leading me to explore the other levels of significance of this narrative strategy. What follows is a tale about continuity and subversion, and this continuity and subversion we'll be able to maybe discuss it during the question period. So we're at the slide number 9. So in my most recent thesis chapter, I analyzed Cuban fiction of the 2nd decade of the new millennium. So we have Virgen en la Pradera, in Crimen de San Jorge. It's a short story by author Michel Encino-Safou. In slide 10, we have Apuntes de Josue, which deals almost exclusively with the Balsero crisis in Cuba. by Nelton Perez that I also met at in Havana for a talk with him in July of 2019. And slide 11, we have La Catedral de los Negros by Marcial Gala, which the backdrop also is in Cienfuegos. And by the way, all these books or were written partly during the special period, or talk about the special period, or reflect about it, reflect upon that special period of economic crisis of the 1990s. So this is by Marcial Gala, who lives between Buenos Aires and Cienfuegos, but he's a lot more based in Buenos Aires right now. So in the first instance, in that chapter, I justified this choice of work because their authors were among the newer generation of narrators in Cuba, those who have dealt more directly with the racial theme and its socio-historical basis, and also because of the use of vernacular language and other linguistic experimentations that to varying degrees revisit the narrative strategies of their predecessors, okay? I also contend that the way language is inscribed in these works both reinforce and flow from Cuba's concept new multi-Cubanidad, or the redefinition, according to Ariana Hernandez-Egan, of Cuba as an ethnic and cultural community. So a viewpoint that not only contrasts with the prior stress on homogeneity of experience, which was afforded by the revolution socialist cosmology or agenda, but also permit counter narratives to discourses as Fernando Ortiz's Cubanidad, the Ajiaco metaphor, and that celebrate Blacks' otherness and cultural differences even within Afro-Cubans. Also, what is special about these texts is that they enter in dialogue with other Caribbean-centric texts, whether intertextually, for example, referring to certain oeuvres like by Carpentier, like El Reino de este Mundo that I have here. Also with theoretical works, there's a lot of Fanon in it. Here I have Peau Noire, Masque Blanc, and Benítez Rojo, La Isla que se repite, references to Glissant. Nonetheless, even if they reaffirm their otherness in relation to more Eurocentric text, they have the specter of Haiti persists in these discussions in these texts, as viewed as the uncanny neighbor that stirs up anxieties in Cuba about this place where we don't want to go back to or become. So this aspect is particularly relevant when studying, where do I have this? When studying particularly Apuntes de Josue, or studying La Catedral de los Negros, when the perceived or Haitian or the character from Haiti or Haiti descendant enters in the narrative space. So, so the reemerging trope of radical alterity, Haiti and Oriente, are also bound with the linguistic factor. So the linguistic factor in these books a lot of times permit to anchor other discussions. So my related to my main objective for that chapter is that if we may perceive an evolution in the way language is used to reflect Cuba's Afro-Caribbean legacy, that is from a narrative strategy that served to construct otherness, to one conveying Cuba's multicultural, regional, and socioeconomic realities. This is not a process that is devoid of tension, and it is not generalized in Cuban fiction of the new millennium. So my main objective was to dismantle this last frontier in which the topics of race, language, and the island's Caribbeanness are intertwined and discussed, and this taking into account these spaces and literary traditions that permit such linguistic experimentations and reflections. So it's, I stirred away from the Havana-centric literary production to go towards what they call provincia, or the Caribbean part of the island, where these spaces were more open. So next slide, slide 12. To make sense of all what precedes, I have summarized my preliminary conclusions and their basis. And I just want to say that, like, this is very, I can't put a lot of nuance that I put maybe in the 100 pages I have written up to now, but it gives you an idea that I can maybe condense it as the significance of this narrative device, or linguistic experimentations, as they call it, in 3 instances. So our language to characterize the Black subject is used as a signifier of socioeconomic, cultural, and moral decay, as the ruinous language that mirrors the ruinous city of Havana, for example, which in turn stands as an allegory of a crumbling social project. The incursions also of African-derived, religious-derived lexicon also adds some degree of otherness by relegating the Black subject to Africa, which was device that was used in colonial literature. So there's the idea of involution of the island during the special period, and I saw that some narrative strategies that were reminiscent of colonial literature came back. Or it serves to revisit Cuba's history and Afro-Cuban, Afro-Caribbean legacy, and now it's the aspect of the incursion of the Haitian descendant, like, for example, Yorkie Dubois Lescaille, that adds this aspect of otherness, but is linked to more a discussion in the Oriental space of the island, or it points to group identity and codes of conduct in poor and marginal neighborhoods. Next slide. Okay, so the factors that determine these instances, I found that it depends on the temporal proximity with the revolution's cosmology and its social modernizing and homogenizing effect. So in the 1990s, we're still close to this tendency where there's this official discourse of we are all Cubans, we are all equal, so there's no discriminatory or almost no discriminatory features pointing to race in the way people are linguistically characterized. Then the special period opens up this space where the idea is that finally we are not all equal. So because the social, the rise of the social and racial inequalities and discrimination affected more the Black subject, then there was this need to document and add authenticity, and thus the integration of the Havana slang. The focus was on that. And there's also the author's own circumstance of living in Centro Havana, where these aspects were more highlighted. And there's the idea of this is the end of the world. It's the fall of the Berlin Wall and all the trope of the runes that reemerge. Let's say the Black subject is instrumentalized to emphasize this aspect. And also with the discourse of multicubanidad, then it's a multiplicity of voices and regional differences that emerge. Also the geographical proximity to the Caribbean region and its literary tradition, stemming from Cabrera Infante, José Solar-Puig, Guillermo Vidal, are influences also that permit to talk about the language issue and to use it as a pretext to talk about all the social dynamics and the particular history of Cuba. So the last slide. Oh no, this slide was like something I found really interesting so people understand the shift that was between the fact of not integrating in narrative discriminatory features to language, not racializing language, let's say, and the fact that what is that we do not speak the same way and we are not from the same places, and more like something that's culturally rich. And the last thing for my presentation is the last slide. A tale about continuity and subversion. So maybe we could like discuss these if you have questions for that, but let's say that there's a continuity because a lot of those novels or are written during or reflect upon the special period. There's a continuity in the literary strategies and the sociological angle of the 1990s that point to discrimination, to point to inequalities. And there's an evolution in the voices from a third person omniscient narrator that's like, you know, giving testimony or observing what's happening, to voices that come from marginal quarters that speak out to what's happening. And these voices that desacralize historical figures and stereotype, and where there's a certain objectifying and othering of the white subject, which is an aspect that's proper to Marcial Gala's La Catedral de los Negros, or the Black's Cathedral, because it's been recently translated in English. So this is what I had to share, and I can answer some questions if there's a little bit of time.
Definitely. Thank you, Catia. So just keep in mindful of the time. Hopefully we can have a couple questions. So I just wanted to pass it over to see if anybody did have questions. Are we using the hand? So I see Rosa, you have your hand up? Oh, it's the clap. Okay, it's applause. So I just wanted to give a couple moments for people to gather themselves to ask a question. And if you did want to ask a question, please signify or jump on. And okay, so there's a question that has been typed into the chat from Shayna. Shayna's asking, where can we access some of the reading materials? And Sandrine says, bravo, Catia. And echoing all of us that are here.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Well, I have, of course, I can send in some sources of what is saying, Shana? They seem so
informative and beneficial as African as an African Studies major / West Indian student?
Well, maybe it would be better if I give my my email and I could share these sources. Is
Sure,
that?
that would be great. Yeah.
I think, can I type in, like, I type in the chat and we can like share some material? That would be really cool, no?
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Katia. Thanks, Shayna, for asking that. I
Yeah.
see that Tara, while you're doing that.
And I wanted to say also that Robarts Library, when it's open and they have curbside pickup, is a great place also to find Cuban literature. Because I have to say that I had to raid the last instance of the curbside pickup that was suspended recently to get some stuff. But there's a collection that's very interesting. So this is my email for Shaina.
Okay, thank you, Katia, for sharing that. And so if anyone is looking for those Cuban books, we know who to go to, who has the stash.
Yeah, I got the stash.
Okay, so I'm just gonna see for a question, just something that just came to mind when I was just hearing you talk about how the linguistic expression of the characters in the book was like to denote otherness or blackness, and then you had brought in the element of like Haitians and people of Haitian descent in Cuba. And I was just thinking of that. Maybe I didn't understand it correctly, but it was like a kind of way of like, I don't know if the term would be correct, but like double othering of the people.
Yeah, because and it's funny because the context is that it's not funny, but it's just to say that it so happens that Haiti is the figure of radical alterity in the Cuban imaginary. And the interventions are not just by white characters, but from Black Cuban characters that will always point to this alterity. And the fact is that, for example, they point to the special way that the Haitian descendant that lives in Guantanamo or Santiago, to the way they pronounce some things, and that have, like, influence from Creole, and the idea that they try to sometimes to overcorrect their way of speaking, So it means at a certain point, I saw it was like a Fanonian episode where it's the Martiniquais that goes to Paris and he tries to really like not eat his R's, So he puts R's everywhere to be sure, because the consciousness of the way that some words, some consonants are not expressed or voiced. So it becomes like the thing of, for example, I saw this guy, he looked like me, a mulatto with green eyes, and that's, and he says, but I really did not like the way he was pronouncing these S's. So I asked him, you're Asian, no? And he says, no, I'm from France. I'm not a Caribbean guy like you. So it's always like these tensions also. And it revisits like the fact of also having the Haitian descendant or the supposedly Haitian national in this narrative space. It brings us to talk about this special period when the braceros, Jamaican braceros, Haitian, migrated to work on the sugar plants, the American-owned sugar plants at the beginning of the 20th century. So sometimes it's a hook or it's a pretext to revisit past history to help explain the social conflicts that emerged since, or that were permitted to emerge since the 1990s. I don't know if I was able to answer your question.
And I have many questions, but I will just pause for now because you led me into a couple more with even that word permitted. So I see.
Yeah, we'll hook up and we'll talk about it, I think, more, because I would have to have like hours and hours.
We'll arrange that. I promise. We'll get that sorted on our side. So I see. Is it Ivan or Ivan?
Yeah, Ivan.
Ivan, okay.
Hi, Catia. Thanks a lot for the talk. That was really interesting, and lots of good leads and books. So on a related note, talking about Haiti, I want to ask you about the presence or the discourse, if there is any, about the Haitian Revolution in the official narrative of the Cuban regime and on other possible different sources, because I mean, revolutions, and especially I think Latin American revolutions, are always referring to previous revolts and uprisings and revolutionaries. And in Cuba, obviously, you have the War of Independence and Martí and Maceo and other references up to Bolivar or Sandino, but I don't remember encountering much talk or any at all about Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, and I've just realized how surprising that is. I don't know if you shared that idea or what you think about why that happens.
Well, if you go back to I could also share some readings about that, but it's more like the fact that the abolition of slavery came at the same time temporarily as in Brazil, in Cuba, because of the risk that there was always a risk that there would be a slave rebellion imitating Haiti, because if you go and the Haitian Revolution is always like is always in the imaginary, because first of all you have to know that the big part of the sugar industry was in Saint-Domingue, and then when there was the Haitian Revolution happened, some planters and their slaves, they migrated where? To Cuba, and then Cuba became the place for the sugar industry. So this, maybe it's not an official narrative, in official discourse of the revolution, but it's always something that is in the backdrop. There's Elzbieta Slodowska. She talks about this aspect. I think also somebody else, Maguire, also talks about this aspect of Haiti and the imaginary of and how it informs. So, and I even like, if you want to read, there's Rafael Rojas also that talks about this persistence of this uneasiness of Cuba in the Caribbean context because of that, and the fact that there were some discourses in the 1990s that emerged that that maybe Cuba would become another Haiti. So it's the link with poverty, it's the link with the Haitian Revolution and the way it is perceived. But these are things that I have some specific texts that could help. Let's say that it's not something that's in official discourse. It's more in literary.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing,
yeah,
is why it's pushed out of official revolutionary discourse, right? Why this fear still persists from the.
It's a fear that persists. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
Guerrita del 12 and that sort of, yeah.
yes, yes, Independientes de Color
Yeah. Mm.
and all of that. That's, you have to find that in books that are not like officially in the official discourse.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for this question, because that's something I'm working out also or to analyze more. So
I just wanted to check in for the sake of time to see whether or not we had an opportunity to ask any more questions, just if Tara or Nancy or Annetta.
We were supposed to go till 2, but if folks are interested in staying longer, Catia is our first presenter. We don't have anybody following her, so if folks are happy to stay on, I'm happy to stay on, Kevin, if you have time. And let's say we'll go for a little while longer.
Sure, no, that's great. So I just wanted to highlight, I don't know if you could see in the chat, but again, more people giving praise and thanks to you, Catia, for your presentation.
Thank you so much for being there.
And Lisa was just actually speaking to the last question that was asked about the role of Haiti and kind of this ever-present specter in the minds of like the white planters. So I think you are really speaking to this. And I was just thinking about a talk that happened last year with Professor Victoriano Martinez talking about the role of Haitian influence or the embodiment of Blackness and how it is a prominent feature in Dominican literature. And just hearing it come up again, this is my ignorance for not being really embedded in the literature, but seeing how it also has a place in Cuban literature is fascinating for me. So I just wanted to see if anyone else had a question to ask Catia, as we have a bit more time, as Tara has said. So I'll wait a couple seconds and see. Okay, so Tara has a question about gender.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Catia, I was wondering, in your analysis, did gender end up being important? Were there characters whose gender ended up interacting with some of the linguistic or sociolinguistic patterns that you noticed?
Well, you mean if there's a difference between women and men in how they're characterized?
Yes, or in their language patterns, or if there were people who were non-binary, if there were characters who didn't assume one gender or another. Was there any way in which linguistic patterns that you noticed were gendered, as well as classed, as well as raced?
Well, what I find it's especially in the last novel, La Catedral de los Negros. Of course, gender identity and it can change, but let's say that when you see women that have certain characteristics, very like using a lot of the slang, they're prostitutes. So they're they're linked to a certain part of society. They call them the luchadoras. But yeah, so, and what's special is that these women that are like some of the characters' mothers, okay, they talk like they're really bad mouth, and then it's funny because their sons that are kind of in these marginal quarters say, oh, like my mother used to say, oh, my mom used to speak that way, like it's very special how they're conscious of the aspect that maybe their mother is supposed to give them the right example, so that's an aspect of it. But like I didn't really look into the aspect of gender, but I looked into the role of the mother as being accused of, you know, what didn't work out well afterwards.
So interesting, right? All the expectations we put on mothers, right? To pass on language, to pass on culture in particular ways, right? And so I'm sure there's a really rich analysis there too. And if not for the dissertation, maybe for the postdoc.
I would like to see how women, I have the idea that women writers do not integrate that vernacular in that way so much. And this is another research topic that I would like to, I want to do it. Because I did this preliminary thing, negra, wendigera, she doesn't use that's, you know, the slang that much. So it's her, but I want to go see also like Marta Rojas. I want to explore people that, like, she's Havana based, you know? So I want to go in other quarters, like other regions of Cuba, and see how women, you know, how women use language and to the service to explain social phenomena, and if they do the same thing as men authors, you know.
I think that would be a great project also. Yeah.
Also, on top of that, thank you. I see that my supervisor, Nestor Rodriguez, talking about Cuban theater. And this is, I want to answer by saying that what lies ahead is going back to the colony, because I was able to meet with authors and get some material. I basically wrote the 2 last chapters first. So now I have to start my first chapter where I'm going to study more like the linguistic representations based on like Cecilia Valdés. And I'm also going to touch upon the teatro buffo, where you have these types of narrative strategies, because yes, I'm very conscious that I have to go see in the precedents that come from theater and poetry to inform my analysis that is on narrative. And I saw that, I don't know if I answered your question, Nestor. And I just wanted to comment that it's because of, I don't know if Rosa is still around, Rosa Sarabia, but it's thanks to Rosa Sarabia that I was hooked on the 2 versions of the detective fiction, Primero Muerto. So I was supposed to just analyze the second version, and then she showed me the first version. She received a copy of it, and anyways, I got hold of that copy and I said, oh yeah. She said, you don't have to compare them, but I decided to compare them, and it was great because that's part of one of my thesis chapters. So I wanted to thank Rosa for that.
There was another question that came up from Naid in the chat. So are you able to see it, or you want me to read it out?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
So I would like to thank what is the relationship you found between la Virgen de la Caridad de Cobre? Oh, I didn't look into that. I didn't look into that, Naid, but I know that the Virgen de la Caridad de Cobre, she comes back a lot, and in literature, in the works that I'm studying. And what comes a lot as a symbol is the 3 Juanes, the 3 Johns. And it's the way also, you know, it's like a ongoing story that we don't know if it's a white, mulatto, black, or if it's a black with two Taino descendants. And in one of the characters in the short story by Nelton Perez, they refer, he's like objectified because they refer to him as the Black Juan, you know? So when when you buy, for example, one moment. So when you go to see, you know, the shrine of La Virgen, and you go to El Cobre, and if you buy, you know, this is the Virgin, and there's always the little boat with 3 characters, you know, the 3 Juanes, the 3 Johns, who saw this plate, a plaque, a floating piece of wood announcing, I am the Virgin, blah, blah, okay? Well, like in that short story, for example, what's it called? The female character refers to this myth to like kind of objectify the Black character, their Black friend that's in the boat. She said like, we resembled, you know, the people that were on the boat, you know, there was just more whites that standing out, but like they kind of, that character is like part of he's put into the Cuban family, but at the same time he's like objectified because he's treated like this little, you know, this little piece of wood that you could buy, and that represents the Black figure in the Virgen de la Caridad thing. So these are, but again, maybe this is crazy, but it's the way I do these links. It's because when they talk about the Virgen de la Caridad de Cobre, it's to point to a certain aspect of the building of the nation and what it is to be Cuban, and who's included in that project and who was excluded and then included and then partially excluded. So it's more about the building of the nation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Catia. So I just wanted to do a check-in again.
Okay.
In terms of the time with Tara and everyone, but I think I'm still okay for another question or two if people are there, but I just wanted to make sure everyone had an opportunity to ask a question that wanted to before we wrap up. And also to thank everyone for coming out. And yes, Catia, we will have a time where you're able to present more robustly, but we appreciate you setting the bar really high and condensing so much into a small time in terms of your presentation, which is always a challenge. I know that's our worst fear, is we have always so much to say in 20 minutes, you know, to do that. So that was really well done. Thank you. So I just wanted to do a poll of the folks that are still in the room if there was any other questions that people wanted to ask. Or so again, so Veronica is saying, thank you for an insightful talk, Catia. Lots of food for thought.
Thank you, Veronica. Gracias.
And I think with that, I think the folks that have been here have been able to ask questions.
Yeah.
But it's setting us up, I think, for another discussion that we could have, hopefully once we can all return in person, hopefully in the fall, where we would be able to feature the work that you're doing and ask more questions, because I think a lot of the questions that came up, you know, we could have an entire talk about them. And we'd like to hear more of your work, about your work as it progresses as well, and to hear about those chapters that are still in formation. So with that, I just wanted to thank you know, Tara as well for helping to
Yes.
organize this, and Nancy and Annetta and everyone that has been not just behind the scenes, but pulling everything together to make this new college fellow talk series happen. And we're looking forward to having more talks in the upcoming weeks. I do not have the schedule in front of me right now, but perhaps Tara, if you do have that information, if you wanted to just give a quick sort of segue into who will be coming up next. And thank you again, Catia, for your wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yes, Catia, thank you so much. It's not easy to be the first one, and you did a great job. I'm just going to share my screen so we can look at together what's coming up. Today was May 5th, and we had the wonderful presentation by Catia, and we're going to skip next week because it's Eid, but then we're going to come back the week of May 19th, a different kind of presentation in that we're going to share the space with 3 of our fellows, 2 from critical studies in equity and solidarity, and Rebecca and Lucy will be joining us on the topics of grief medicines and on settler citizenship. And then Jade was also going to be part of that session, also interested in language, just like Catia is, and they're going to be looking at questions of participation for students who speak English as an additional language, and that will be great. The following week, we have 3 more. We have Jonathan from Human Biology, and Kunga from Buddhism, Psychology, and Mental Health, and then Huda from African Studies. And each of the program directors will be doing the work that Kevin did today. Kevin, you did a great job. Thanks for leading us there. So we hope that we see you soon. These are wonderful opportunities to engage with research, with folks who've been part of our community, and we wish you all the best, Catia. I think you're going to have a brilliant future ahead of you because you are so clear and so accessible and ask the kinds of questions that engage us all in great conversation. So congratulations. Nancy, thanks so much for the beautiful poster and for everything you've done to set us up. You did a great job with the slides. And we have now begun our Senior Doctoral Fellowship Speaker Series, and we'll look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Okay, everybody, thanks so much and have a good week. Thanks so much, Catia. It was great.
Thank you so much for offering me the space and the help and everything. Thank you so much.
A bientôt. We'll see you all later.
A bientôt.
A bientôt. Bye-bye.